taste of the private ownership of land. Even the mass movements, 27, even the mass movements which rise in the name of freedom against an oppressive order do not realize individual liberty once they start rolling. So long as the movement is engaged in a desperate struggle with the prevailing order or must defend itself against enemies within or without, its chief preoccupation will be with unity and self-sacrifice, which require the surrender of the individual's will, judgment, and advantage. According to Robespierre, Robespierre, the revolutionary government was, quote, the despotism of liberty against tyranny. The important point, see Mark Levin's book, Liberty and Tyranny. The important point is that in forgetting or postponing individual liberty, the active mass movement does not run counter to the inclinations of a zealous following. Fanatics, says Renan, fear liberty more than they fear persecution. It is true that the adherents of a rising movement have a strong sense of liberation, even though they live and breathe in an atmosphere of strict adherence to tenets and commands. This sense of liberation comes from having escaped the burdens, fears, and hopelessness of the unattainable individual existence. It is this escape which they feel as a deliverance and redemption. The experience of the vast change, too, conveys a sense of freedom, even though the changes are executed in a frame of strict discipline. It is only when the movement has passed an active stage and solidified into a pattern of stable institution that individual liberty has a chance to emerge. The shorter the active phase, the more it will seem that the movement itself, rather than the termination, made possible the emergence of the individual freedom. This impression will be the most pronounced, the more tyrannical the dispensation which the mass movement overthrew and supplanted. 28. Those who see their lives as spoiled and wasted crave equality and fraternity more than they do freedom. If they clamor for freedom, it is but freedom to establish equality and uniformity. The passion for equality is partially a passion for anonymity, to be one thread of the many which make up a tunic, one thread not distinguishable from the others. No one can then point us out, measure us against others, and expose our inferiority. Those who clamor loudest for freedom are often the ones least likely to be happy in a free society. The frustrated, oppressed by their shortcomings, blame their failure on existing restraints. Actually, their innermost desire is for an end to the free-for-all. They want to eliminate free competition and ruthless testing to which the individual is continually subjected in a free society. 29. Where freedom is real, equality is the passion of the masses. Where equality is real, freedom is the passion of a small minority. Equality without freedom creates more stable social pattern than freedom without equality. The creative poor. Poverty, when coupled with creativeness, is usually free of frustration. This is true of the poor artisan, skilled in his trade, and of the poor writer, artist, and scientist, in the full possession of creative powers. Nothing so bolsters our self-confidence and reconciles us with ourselves as the continuous ability to create, to see things grow and develop under our hand, day in, day out. The decline of handicrafts in modern times is perhaps one of the causes of the rise of frustration and the increased susceptibility of the individual to mass movements. It is impressive to observe how, with a fading of the individual's creative powers, there appears pronounced inclination towards joining a mass movement. Here, the connection between the escape from the ineffectual self and the responsiveness to mass movements is very clear. The slipping author, artist, scientist, slipping because of a drying up of the creative flow within, drifts sooner or later into the camps of ardent patriots, race-mongers, uplift promoters, and champions of holy causes. Perhaps the sexually impotent are subject to the same impulse. The role of the non-creative in the Nazi movement is discussed in section 111. The unified poor. The poor, who are members of a compact group, a tribe, a closely knit family, a compact racial or religious group, are relatively free of frustration and hence almost immune to the appeal of a proselytizing mass movement. The less a person sees himself as an autonomous individual capable of shaping his own course and solely responsible for his station in life, the less likely it is to see his poverty as evidence of his own inferiority. A member of a compact group has a higher revolting point than an autonomous individual. It requires more misery, personal humiliation to goad him to revolt. The cause of revolution in a totalitarian society is usually the weakening of the totalitarian framework rather than resentment against oppression and distress. The strong family ties of the Chinese probably keep them for ages relatively immune to the appeal of mass movements. The European who dies for his country has behaved in a manner that is unintelligible to a Chinaman, because his family is not directly benefited. It is indeed damaged by the loss of one of its members. On the other hand, he finds it understandable and honorable when a Chinaman is, in consideration of so much paid to his family, consents to be executed as a substitute for a condemned criminal. It is obvious that proselytizing mass movements must break down all existing group ties if it is to win a considerable following. The ideal potential convert is the individual who stands alone, who has no collective body. He can blend with and lose himself in, so mask the pettiness, meaninglessness, and the shabbiness of his individual existence. Where a mass movement finds the corporate pattern of family, tribe, country, etc. in a state of disruption and decay, it moves in and gathers the harvest. Where it finds the corporate pattern in good repair, it must attack and disrupt. On the other hand, when, as in recent years in Russia, we see the Bolshevik movement bolstering family solidarity and encouraging national, racial, and religious coercion, it is a sign that the movement has passed its dynamic phase, that it has already established its new pattern of life, and that its chief concern is to hold and preserve that which it has attained. In the rest of the world, where communism is still a struggling movement, it does all it can to disrupt the family and discredit national, racial, and religious ties. 32. The attitude of rising mass movements towards the family is of considerable interest. Almost all of our contemporary movements showed in their early stages a hostile attitude toward the family and did all they could to discredit and disrupt it. They did it by undermining the authority of parents, by felicitating divorce, by taking over the responsibility for feeding, educating, and entertaining the children, and not by encouraging illegitimacy. Crowded housing, exile, concentration camps, and terror also helped to weaken and break up the family. Still, not one of our contemporary movements was so outspoken in its antagonism towards the family as was early Christianity. Jesus minced no words. For I am come to set a man at variance against his father, and the daughter against her mother, and the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a man's foes shall be they of his own household. He that loveth father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he that loveth son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. When he was told that his mother and brothers were outside desiring to speak with him, he said, Who is my mother, and who are my brethren? And he stretched forth his hand toward his disciples, and said, Behold my mother and my brethren. When one of his disciples asked leave to go and bury his father, Jesus said to him, Follow me, and let the dead bury their dead. He seemed to sense the ugly family conflicts his movement was bound to provoke, both by its proselytizing and by the fanatical hatred of its antagonists. And the brother shall deliver up the brother to death, and the father the child, and the children shall rise up against their parents, and cause them to be put to death. It is strange but true that he who preaches brotherly love also preaches against love of mother, father, brother, sister, wife, and children. The Chinese sage Mao Tzu, who advocated brotherly love, was rightly condemned by the Confucianists, who cherished the family above all. They argued that the principle of universal love would dissolve the family and destroy society. The proselytizer who comes and says, Follow me, is a family wrecker, even though he is not conscious of any hostility towards the family, and has not the least intention of weakening its solidarity. When St. Bernard preached, his influence was such that mothers are said to have hid their sons from him, and wives their husbands, lest he should lure them away. He actually broke up so many homes that the abandoned wives formed a nunnery. As one would expect, the disruption of the family, whatever it causes, fosters automatically a collective spirit and creates a responsiveness to the appeal of mass movements. The Japanese invasion undoubtedly weakened the compact family pattern of the Chinese and contributed to the recent increased responsiveness to both nationalism and communism. In the industrialized Western world, the family is weakened and disrupted mainly by economic factors. Economic independence for women facilitates divorce. Economic independence for the young weakens paternal authority and also hastens an early splitting up of the family group. The drawing power of large industrial centers on people living on farms and in small towns strains and breaks family ties. By weakening the family, these factors contributed somewhat to the growth of the collective spirit in modern times. Hitler's lunatic shifting of entire populations during the Second World War and his fantastic feats of extermination must have minced and scrambled millions of families in a large part of Europe. At the same time, the Anglo-American air raid, the expulsion of 9 million Germans from the east and south of Europe, and the delayed repetition of German prisoners of war did to Germany what Hitler had done to Europe. It is difficult to see how, even under optimal economic and political conditions, a content strewn with the odds and ends of families could settle into a normal conservative social pattern. And continuing strewn with the odds and ends of families could settle into a normal conservative social pattern. 33. The discontent generated in backwards countries by their contact with Western civilization is not primarily resentment against exploitation by dominating foreigners. It is rather the result of a crumbling or weakening of tribal solidarity and communal life. The ideal of self-advancement which the civilizing West offers to backward populations brings with it the plague of individual frustration. All the advantages brought by the West are ineffectual substitutes for the sheltering and soothing anonymity of a communal existence. Even when the westernized native attains personal success, becomes rich, or masters a respectful profession, he is not happy. He feels naked and orphaned. The nationalist movements in the colonial countries are partly a striving after group existence and an escape from Western individualism. The Western colonizing powers offer the native the gift of individual freedom and independence, then try to teach him self-reliance. What it all actually amounts to is individual isolation. It means the cutting off of an immature and poorly furnished individual from the corporate whole and releasing him, in the words of Khomyakov, spelled Khomiakov, to the freedom of his own impotence. The feverish desire to band together and coalesce into marching masses, so manifest both in our homelands and in the countries we colonize, is the expression of a desperate effort to escape this ineffectual, purposeless individual existence. It is very possible, therefore, that the present nationalist movements in Asia may lead, even without Russian influence, to a more or less collectivist rather than democratic form of society. The policy of an exploiting colonial power should be to encourage communal cohesion among the natives. It should foster equality and a feeling of brotherhood among them, for by now much of the ruled blend lose themselves into a compact whole by so much it is softened poignancy of their individual futility, and the process which transmutes misery into frustration and revolt is checked at the source. The device of divide and rule is ineffective when it aims at a weakening of all forms of cohesion among the ruled. The breaking up of a village community, a tribe, or nation into autonomous individuals does not eliminate or stifle the spirit of rebellion against the ruling power. An effective division is one that forces a multiplicity of compact bodies, racial, religious, or economic, vying with and suspicious of each other. Even when a colonial power is wholly philanthropic and its sole aim is to bring prosperity and progress to a backward people, it must do all it can to preserve and reinforce the corporate pattern. It must not concentrate on the individual, but inject the innovations and reforms into tribal or communal channels, and let the tribe or the community progress as a whole. It is perhaps true that the successful modernization of a backward people can be brought about only within a strong framework of united action. The spectacular modernization of Japan was accomplished in an atmosphere charged with the fever of united action and group consciousness. Soviet Russia's advantage as a colonizing power, aside from her lack of racial bias, is that it comes with a ready-made and effective pattern of united action. It can disregard and indeed deliberately sweep away all existing group ties without the risk of breeding individual discontent and eventual revolt. For the Sovietized native, it is not left struggling alone in a hostile world. He begins his new life as a member of a closely knit group more compact and communal than his former clan or tribe. The device of encouraging communal cohesion as a preventive of colonial unrest can also be used to prevent labor unrest in the industrialized colonizing countries. The employer, whose only purpose is to keep his workers at their task and get all he can out of them, is not likely to attain his goal by dividing them, playing off one worker against the other. It is rather in his interest that the workers should feel themselves part of a whole, and preferably a whole which compromises the employer too. A vivid feeling of solidarity, whether racial, national, or religious, is undoubtedly an effective means of preventing labor unrest. Even when the type of solidarity is such that it cannot compromise the employer, it nevertheless tends to promote labor contentment and efficiency. Experience shows that production is at its best when the workers feel and act as members of a team. Any policy that disrupts and tears apart the team is bound to cause severe trouble. Incentive wages plans that offer bonuses to individual workers do more harm than good. Group incentive plans in which the bonus is based on the work of the whole team, including the foreman, are much more likely to promote greater productivity and greater satisfaction on the part of the workers. 34. The rising mass movement attracts and holds a following not by its doctrine and promises, but by the refuge it offers from the anxieties, bareness, and meaninglessness of an individual existence. It cures the poignantly frustrated not by conferring on them an absolute truth or by remedying the difficulties and abuses which made their lives miserable, but by freeing them from their ineffective selves, and it does this by enfolding and absorbing them into a closely knit and exultant corporate whole. It is obvious, therefore, that in order to succeed, a mass movement must develop at the earliest moment a compact corporate organization and a capacity to absorb and integrate all comers. It is futile to judge the viability of a new movement by the truth of its doctrine and the feasibility of its promises. What has to be judged is its corporate organization for quick and total absorption of the frustrated. Where new creeds vie with each other for the allegiance of the populace, the one which comes with the most perfected collective framework wins. Of all the cults and philosophies which competed in the Greco-Roman world, Christianity alone developed from its inception a compact organization. No one of its rivals possessed so powerful and coherent a structure as did the Church. No other gave its adherents quite the same feeling of coming into a closely knit community. The Bolshevik movement